I know there's lots of options available for you when it comes to webinars, as we are in the situation that we are in today with lots of us working from home. So really, when I say thank you, I really honestly mean it. Today's webinar, we'll talk about Omega HDBaseT products of the future. And in this webinar, what we'll be discussing are the Omega product family from Atlona specifically, and how it fits in your Huddle Room conference room spaces. Just quickly through an agenda, we'll review some of the trends at a very high level and very quickly as to what we see in conference room spaces, where they have been, where they are, where they're going. Then we'll dive into some of the newer technologies and driving technologies that we're seeing in these spaces as far as how we're seeing change. We'll dive into specifically on what is Omega, what its features and functionality is. We'll walk through some applications, and then finally we'll talk about kind of technologies that we might see 2 to 3, maybe even 5 years down the road. From a timeline perspective, and we'll jump right into this, I just want to give you guys a quick highlight of what a timeline for conferencing and classrooms has looked like in the past. On the top left-hand side of the screen, you'll see hopefully a very familiar conference room. And in this conference room, you see people that are interacting within the room, maybe not even interacting within the room, and a whiteboard. There's not really any audio video technology being brought into the room itself, and all the people interacting in the room don't have any interaction with the outside world. That was then, and that then has been mostly laid by the wayside and replaced with something that you see in the next photo. The next photo really highlights where most of our conference rooms and huddle rooms play today, which is simply just having some type of conference room phone in the room, and in some cases you also have a display that can share to something like a Skype for Business. In this case, you got a gentleman who's super excited to have a conversation with his boss, but what his boss might not know is that he isn't actually that excited, right? So you lose a lot of the human elements when it comes to interacting with people in these types of spaces. Fast forward to today, we see a lot of customers and a lot of people transitioning to newer video conferencing products so that you can both see people and hear people at the same time. You can read body languages and really have a better understanding of what an overall individual is thinking. Similarly, on the classroom side, you'll see that we have on the bottom left-hand corner what I would consider to be most classrooms that I've at least interacted with in the last 5 or 7 years, which is a blackboard as well, and the AV that's in the room is really a document camera and a projector screen. As we see a transition to the next area, it's really that middle picture is we have active learning classroom spaces. These active learning classroom spaces are designed to take that lecture style and break it down into smaller groups for learning with multiple instructors throughout that room. In that space alone, you see that there are more displays, there's more functionality from an AV system in the space, and we've started to see a shift go in that direction. Now, similarly to how we see video conferencing coming to play in those corporate enterprise spaces, in the education market, especially right now, and the status that we are in with a lot of people having to stay home because of COVID-19, we do see that a large percentage of, if not all, major K-12 education and universities are actually transitioning to fully online classrooms. Not something that's necessarily foreign, but not something that's really been scaled in the past. And we'll talk a little bit about how we address those issues going forward. But as we see the trend towards video conferencing, what we really need to know is the fact that why has video conferencing taken hold in the marketplace? Is it really because of COVID-19? The answer is really no. COVID-19 is a catalyst for change to adopt video conferencing, but IT professionals and lots of reports have said that video conferencing is something that they are seeing on the rise over the last 2 years, about 75% reporting that in some way, shape, or form, they use video conferencing. So what has it been? Video conferencing has been a proprietary conferencing hardware and software platform for a very long time. It was super expensive, very complicated to implement. Because it was expensive and complicated to implement, the complications meant you have to have specialized people that were trained specifically on individual platforms. And then as they would install those systems, they would also have to train people on how to use them. Overall, it was just not a great scenario. When you looked at the quality of the video that was coming through, you would have, generally speaking, a 480p or 720p signal. So the video feed actually wasn't that high quality, and it was met with constant interruption, lots of buffering, video frame freezes, maybe even video dropping off, whatever the case might be, the quality just really wasn't there. Fast forward to today and the newer platforms that you see out there, the soft codec software is really the way to go where people have been. They interact with pretty much any hardware device that you want. It can be hosted on a server, and it can also be locally hosted on someone's device, such as a mobile phone or a tablet. Overall, they become very low cost and very simple to implement. And from a quality perspective, you have high quality video, and you also have constant interruptions, maybe a dog in the background, or maybe your significant other asking you what you want for dinner because you can't make a decision, 3 days in a row. But those interruptions, in my opinion, are always interruptions that are really welcomed. From a driving technologies perspective, what we want to understand are what are some of the technologies that we're moving forward with, and that we're seeing become more prevalent in that type of space, being the conference room, the huddle room, the classroom. I already talked about it a little bit, but the whole concept is that you really need to understand the increasing role of software platforms as to what they are today. In 2019, Gartner Research released a report that talks about the top 10 things you should be looking for when looking to replace your dated conference room system. And we're focusing on the top 6 on the left-hand side here. Number 1, ease of use. Can I use my software today and can I use that intuitively? Can I train people on how to use it easily? And can it be in such a way that I don't have to really have a lot of specialized training, a lot of hand holding to get the people that are using it up to speed with it, working with it on a daily basis. Number 2, blending of asynchronous and synchronous collaboration across consistent workspaces. What that really means is, can I use chat? Can I use IM? Can I share content across the screen? Can I have a video conference and an audio conference in some way, shape, or form that is easy for me to handle? If I can accomplish those things, you know that the software you're using is good for you today. 3 and 4, I look at as being one and the same. Consistent experience through both mobile, desktop, as well as room systems for any location, as well as consistent capability from group video system codecs across devices. For me, what this means is that if I'm using a tablet, if I'm using my phone, if I'm using a dedicated piece of hardware that is in a conference room, do I have the same experience? Does this experience feel the same? And do I have the same exact capabilities? If I have the same capabilities and the experience is one and the same, the likelihood that the adoption rate of these softwares will go up. And by all means, the troubleshooting and whatnot that the user has to go through is pretty much one and the same. Number 5, capability to deliver large enterprise webinars. Just an example today would be a good one, but these software platforms now today have to be designed to have one-to-one communications, meaning I can have individual interactions, and they have to scale to 1 to 50, 1 to 100, if not more, right? And so we're asking these softwares to do a lot more than they have in the past. And then number 6 is really one that for us is near and dear to our heart at Panduit and Atlona. It's a focus on the meeting room and huddle room spaces. And for what we see in the market is a lot of these larger divisible rooms, larger training rooms, and just large conference rooms in general are really going by the wayside and being replaced with meeting rooms and huddle room spaces. So how do these softwares capitalize on that smaller group interaction? Gartner, really at the end of the day, they say that today's software platforms aim to classify themselves as a meeting room solution, not really just an audio or video conferencing platform, right? And what that really means is that you're getting more capabilities than just being able to share yourself and the content that's there, but that you can do so much more with it. For those of you who have used Microsoft Skype for Business, you probably know that it is transitioning to Microsoft Teams in the near future. And so with that transition to Microsoft Teams, you actually are getting a ton more capability than what you have in the past. So if you haven't taken a step to do a little bit of training with Microsoft Teams to see what those additional capabilities are, if you're using Microsoft Teams, by all means, please do it. The second technology that we see as a driving technology in the marketplace is HDBaseT. And HDBaseT has been around for a very long time. However, recent innovations in HDBaseT, as well as something called 5Play, have really taken hold in what the next generation of these rooms can look like. HDBaseT has, in and of itself, is the ability to take a 12 to 15 foot limitation for AV signal and change that signal to HDBaseT, send it over a category cable up to 100 meters. In this example, I have the ability to send that UHD 4K high resolution video with super low latency across that 100-meter channel. And then I have the ability to use HDBaseT 5Play with these types of products. Now, HDBaseT 5Play is the ability to say, just as the graphic explains, I can send an audio video signal. I can also send control signals such as RS-232 and IR. I can pass through 100 megabits worth of Ethernet. I can even include 100 watts of power into this one cable and send it across to the other device on the other side. The other thing I can do is incorporate USB data communication, and that's where we really see HDBaseT capitalizing in the conference room, huddle room space. Speaking of USB, it's another driving technology, probably one that you're all very familiar with. USB, because of its ability to be a universal style connector, has a good benefit for how these systems are going to play in the future. So what we can do is look at there's 5 connector types. You're probably most familiar with type A, type B. The newer one on the market is type C. We'll skip the mini and micro for now. And the real big play here is that the speed of USB has increased dramatically over the last several years. If I look at what most of us are familiar with, it's that USB 2.0. USB 2.0 is able to pass 480 megabits per second across it. Whereas if I look at USB 3.0 and 3.1, typically denoted by a blue connector, as you see in the photo, you're able to get 5 gigabits per second and even 10 gigabits per second across that link. And that's really where USB is becoming more and more relevant rather than what it's been in the past. As I mentioned, it's universal and it's really a plug and play technology. It has really been designed to be able to connect peripherals to computers and devices, and it's still staying relevant today in that regard. I briefly touched on USB-C, but is another one that we see as a driving technology in the future. USB-C is really the capability to take a connector style and drive 4 cables into one. So I look at USB-C, it is universal, it's up and down orientation, it's really orientationless, but from an audio video, or from a cables perspective, I can take an audio video signal, I can take my data communications, I can send power across it, and I can even send USB data communications across that one cable. So it really, if I look at a conference room today, I'm taking 4 cables, placing it into one, I'm just plugging one cable into a device, and I'm moving on with my life, and I get all the functionality that I'm looking for. From a speed perspective or a data rate perspective, you're able to get that USB 3.0 or 3.1 standard of 10 gigabits and 5 gigabits per second. And additionally, you can deliver at least 20 watts up to 100 watts of power through a USB-C cable. Really a new technology, a new connector technology. If you've bought a device in the last year and a half or so, you most likely have interacted with USB-C, with the exception of the iPhone, because iPhone is not doesn't have USB-C yet. But nonetheless, it is a relevant connector style, and we're going to see it more and more and more in the future. So those are the driving technologies. One of the things we want to highlight now is understanding what Omega is and how Omega fits into this whole equation. So Omega is a product family from Atlona, and it's a product family that is based on HDBaseT technology. But not only that, some of the technologies we just talked about are really driven and highlighted within this product family. From a products perspective, we categorize Omega into 3 major categories. We have simple HDBaseT extenders. We have matrix switchers that take multiple inputs and deliver multiple outputs. And then we have presentation switchers that take multiple inputs and multiple outputs. And they also have the ability to do a lot more when it comes to audio. We also have products that fit kind of in between all these, but for the most part, these are the 3 major areas that we focus on within this product family. From a features perspective, we incorporate the latest HDBaseT standards with 4K and UHD resolutions, being able to send those high resolution videos signals across 100 meters of category cable. We capitalize on compact form factors. So today, or rather in the past, you might have had to have an AV credenza in a room or a cabinet for your AV equipment. Shrinking this form factor allows you to simply place these under a conference room table or maybe in behind a display. We focus on the universal AV format connectivity. We incorporate products like connector technologies like that USB-C capability, and then we replace products such as VGA with HDMI as a part of this line as well, knowing that USB-C is going to be the connector of the future and HDMI becoming more of a legacy connector technology. We also incorporate and work well with video conferencing, such as Zoom and Skype for Business, Microsoft Teams, kind of you name it, it's there. With our USB connectivity and capitalizing on the HDBaseT 5-play architecture. And then finally, we talk about hands-free zero UI operations as being a part of these products. And when I mean hands-free zero UI operations, really what I'm talking about is the fact that I don't necessarily need to have a control system within a room in order to make the room operate in the way that I would like it to. From a hands-free zero UI perspective, went a little too fast there. There's really 3 technologies and 3 features that we build into these products, and I'll talk through them right here. Automatic display control is one of those technologies that we feature in the Omega products line. Automatic display control in its simplest form, simply plug in a device, it'll turn on a display. You unplug that device, it's going to turn the display off. In the graphic below, I have a laptop. I connect that laptop to a switcher. That switcher then goes and says, hey, I see something's connected, please turn on the display. Similarly, when I unplug that device, it'll send the signal saying, hey, there's no signal here anymore, please turn off the display, and the display will automatically turn off. It's a simple, easy, and effective way for us to be able to remove things like a remote control from the system. In addition, for those of you who have ever had to deal with screen burn-in and things of that nature, it's pretty much eliminating that concern altogether, because I will automatically be able to turn on and turn off as sources are connected and disconnected from the space. The second technology that we build into these products is called automatic input selection, also known as auto switching. When it comes to auto switching, it's kind of a very similar aspect. I'm simply going to plug in a source and it will switch to that available source. And as I unplug that source, it'll switch back to the previous source. So in the graphic below, you'll see we have a document camera and a laptop. We'll say the document camera was connected first. Say the laptop's connected next. What's going to happen is I connect that laptop and it's going to tell the display to automatically flip to the laptop as a source instead of the document camera. Similarly, when I unplug that laptop, it will roll back to the document camera as it's still plugged in. It's a simple, easy, and effective way for us to still not have a control system, but allow for us to have automatic switching and allow people to come in, just simply plug their device in and start sharing content to a display without the need for button control or a touch panel, anything of that nature. The last feature that we really build in, and this one's specifically for Omega, is automatic USB routing. And in the case of automatic USB routing, similar to how we do automatic switching, is the fact that we are able to plug in and simply route USB peripheral control. So in this example here, on the right-hand side, I have a PC that might be living behind a display. This is pretty common for a lot of the conference rooms that we're seeing today. It has a USB host connection going into it, and that USB host connection gives you all peripheral control for the peripherals that are in the room. In this case, we have 2 cameras as well as a speakerphone. As I plug in a second USB host, I have the capability to take all those peripherals that are in the room and reroute them to the host computer. That would be the one that just plugged in on the left-hand side. Now, if in a room, what this allows me to do is automatically route that USB. So if I wanted to host a video conference from my laptop or my device, as opposed to maybe a device in the room, for whatever reason, I have the capability to do that autonomously, automatically, without the need to have a control system, without the need to have a touch panel to be able to navigate between the different screens and route the USB as I need appropriately. So that's really some of the technologies as to how we capitalize on that zero UI meeting space. Now I want to transition into some of the applications that we see. So the first application we'll look at is the Huddle Room. The Huddle Room in and of itself is meant for a space that's for 1 to 4 people. And from the AV perspective, you want to add as little AV as you can to it, simply because you want to keep costs down. And at Atlona, we have one of the products that can really feature and highlight that and give you the most bang for your buck. And that would be our Omega Extender Kit. The Omega Extender Kit is a transmitter and a receiver. On the transmitter end, you have a USB device and host capabilities. You also have HDMI into the system. And on the receiver side, you have USB devices for your peripherals as inputs, and you also have an HDMI out that will take you to a display. So in the example here, I might have a conference room table, and the conference room table is, say, 15 feet apart from the display. What I want to be able to do is simply have a user plug their laptop in and be able to share content to the display while also taking USB peripheral control of the camera that's by the display and the speakerphone that's on the table. So from a video perspective, it's pretty simple. I would be taking an HDMI cable, plugging it into that laptop, and then that laptop would be connecting to our transmitter. That video feed is then sent over HDBaseT to that receiver from the transmitter, and then the receiver itself will go to the display via an HDMI cable. Now from the peripheral control for USB, similarly, I would have a USB host connected to my laptop PC, and then I'm able to gain control of the peripherals in the room. The transmitter, or the speakerphone is connected via USB to the transmitter, and then the HDVS camera, which is Atlona's PTZ camera, would be connected to the receiver via USB, and then that actually travels back over HDBaseT to the laptop. So for a very low cost, what I'm able to do in this space is simplify it by not necessarily even needing to have a control system, right? But I also introduced the concept of video conferencing to this huddle room space, giving it more functionality than it typically has had in the past. The next application is the distance learning classroom. And this is one we're starting to see a lot more relevant today as we see a lot of our education customers trying to make plans for what's going to happen in a year from now. And the whole need that they have right now is the fact that they have to host people potentially in a room and not in a room at the same exact time. So in this case, we have to use, as there's more inputs and really more inputs to the system, we're using a larger product, also known as our MS42. The MS42 stands for multi-format switcher, 4 inputs, 2 outputs. From a technologies perspective, we incorporate that universal AV format connectivity with incorporation of the USB-C with power delivery. And then we also have the USB control for host and peripheral devices. Let's take a look at the sources in this diagram below. So I have 2 sources in the room. I have my laptop and my document camera. Laptop's connected via USB-C. It's getting its power from the MS42 via that USB-C as well. And then I have a document camera that's connected via HDMI. Now, at this point, I'll talk about how we send that signal path to the people that might be in the room. And it's simply plugging into that switcher and then sending it out that HDBaseT connection to the receiver. That receiver is then connecting via HDMI to a projector, maybe a display, but in this case, it's a projector. And that's how I'm routing my video signal. Now, in the corner on the left-hand side, you'll see PC with HDMI capture. This is likely going to be a PC in the room that is dedicated for video conferencing. The HDMI, it would have an HDMI capture card so that I can send what I'm sharing on the screen to the people in the room, to the people that might be on that video conference call. So in that case, I have my other HDMI, remember this is a 4x2 switcher. I have that other output going to that HDMI capture card, and then I'm also feeding USB back into the switcher so that I can take control of the USB peripherals that would be in the room. So that computer itself, it would be hosting your conference. It also has the USB microphone for the presenter in the room, and it would also have control of the HDVS camera, depending on where that would be. You would either be able to see the professor or see the classroom, but being it as a PTZ camera, you can kind of swing it wherever you want. And that's really what we're starting to see in the long distance and distance learning classrooms, is the ability for us to show and highlight the fact that we have people in the room, people out of the room at the same exact time, and we're sharing live with them. The next application is really just the general conference room. And the general conference room is a very similar application as what we saw with distance learning. The only difference here is that you might not have a dedicated PC in the room, but in this case, we have a soft codec that's being hosted on someone's laptop that they're bringing into the room. Now, as I have multiple USB connections in this space, what I would be doing is introducing a control system. So in this case, we're adding our velocity control as well as a touch panel. And what we're allowing is additional control and additional functionality by allowing us to either route USB connections, route different sources to the display. Additionally, we can turn the system on, turn the system off if we needed to. There's a whole lot more functionality that you can gain by adding that control system to the room for a fairly low cost. In the example, we have these three sources that are connected to that switcher. That switcher, again, being small form factor, would live under that conference room table. I'm sending all my video feeds back down to an HDBaseT receiver that lives behind that display, and I'm simply sending that video feed back down to the display. From the USB peripherals, again, I have a speakerphone that would live on the conference room table. I have a camera that would live by the display, and simply I'm able to connect those back via USB and HDBaseT back to that switcher, and I'm able to send that control to either the laptop with the USB-C or the laptop with the USB connection to it, depending on how I want to route that with my control system. I'm introducing this at a very low cost to our customers, and they're able to simply offer that soft codec video conferencing capability at a moment's notice. The last application that we'll talk through is the lecture hall conference hall. The lecture hall conference hall in and of itself has a lot more capabilities to it. When we look at it, it's the spaces themselves are generally speaking a lot larger, and because they're a lot larger, they have to have audio reinforcement and mic reinforcement because likely you have 50 plus people in the room. That's where we look at a product like our PS62, our Omega PS62. PS62 stands for Presentation Switcher 6x2, 6 inputs and 2 outputs. Now, this product gives you a lot more functionality and a lot more feature set than products such as our MS42, and that's why it really complies for these spaces. Now, the signal path is a little more complex, and I know we're running a little short on time, but the gist of it is the fact that I can have certain products, certain sources in one location connected to this device, and then I can have other devices and other sources connected in other locations using extensions of those devices. So I have as an input to this PS62, I have HDBaseT connections that can connect to a transmitter, and that's what you see on the left-hand side here. And then I can feed USB back to those as control sources. Additionally, what I can do is I can take the audio out of the system and reroute it into an amplifier to have distributed audio throughout this conference hall. Additionally, I can have microphone capabilities as I have a mic line in to the presentation switcher itself. I can also add a DSP to the system if I need to be able to send that video communication across a codec device for the video conferencing capability. As it's a 6x2 switcher, presentation switcher, I can have a confidence monitor built into this as well, and the system. All the USB peripheral control can also go back to one source as it needs. So let's look at some of the applications that we are seeing today and what we're going to see probably in the next year to 2 years in these spaces. For the future, there's a couple of things that I wanted to take maybe a little higher level approach and give you guys an understanding of what we're starting to see and what we're starting to see customers ask for. Number one is room analytics. Room analytics is really geared at helping us understand the proper way to use our spaces today. We briefly touched on the fact that conference rooms larger conference room spaces are really going towards huddle rooms and smaller conference rooms, right? So as real estate's becoming more and more of a prime number for us, we want to make sure that people are making the right decisions, and we want to give them the confidence to know, or give them confidence with data to know when it's right to make that change. The second one we look at is AI. AI really is dedicated towards understanding rooms that know you before you even need to think about things. So as an example, if I have a conference room that I'm stuffing 10, 12, 14 people in, and it's really meant for 6, the likelihood that that room is going to increase in temperature just because there's more people in the room is very high. Can I build the system to be smart enough so that it knows to move the temperature down because there's more people in the room, so I don't have to think about it before it's too late and everybody gets distracted? Those are the kinds of things that we see AI coming in and doing even more of in the future. And then the last technology, or the last thing we'll look at, is integrated technologies. And I have the this plus that equals what conversation, right? What we see here is the fact that there's a lot of different technologies out there in the market today, and lots of manufacturers are going to try to package them all together to bring you one solution. And then the expertise really comes in on the installers, making sure that they can take that one package solution and critique it for what every conference room space or every meeting room or every classroom is looking for, right? How do I detail it and curtail it so that it works for you specifically, Mr. Customer? One of the examples that I could point out that I see today in the market is the fact that we have sound bars that are starting to incorporate cameras. Some manufacturers are doing it well, some manufacturers are not doing it well, but at the end of the day, it's an example of how I'm taking video technology and audio technology and pushing it together into one for a conference room solution, as opposed to having different sets of things here and there. So that's all I had today. Thank you guys so much for your time. Hopefully this was informative. If it wasn't, I'm sorry. And at this point, I'll turn it back over to Jane.
Thanks so much, Mike. We are a few minutes over on time. We did have some questions come in to the chat window. I'll go ahead and give you the first one. The rest of the questions we will follow up with you all individually after the call. The first question, Mike, is, isn't HDBaseT going to be replaced by AV over IP?
So good question. Yes, in the market in general, we do see that AV over IP is starting to be more incorporated into everyday enterprise environments. And we're starting to see it take some share of what we see in HDBaseT applications. Today, we do see about 70% of installations using HDBaseT, and that number is dropping somewhat substantially. But as HDBaseT and the HDBaseT Alliance is making new innovations and releasing newer chipsets that have more functionality, there's still going to be a play for HDBaseT in the future. What it really boils down to is the fact that AV over IP and HDBaseT have to work in pretty much in a harmonious environment, so that it brings the best AV solution to customers for enterprise corporations and you name it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for your time today. Sorry, we have gone a couple minutes over. Thank you for your time, and this will conclude today's webinar.